This is House Planning Help, episode 236. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. It's the first session of 2019, and it's going to be a slightly different episode, a lot shorter, as I ask the question, what next for House Planning Help? So I've been through Christmas and New Year, and I mentioned in one of the recent podcasts how that was a great idea. You finish your construction project, and then of course you want to host Christmas. And we also hosted a New Year party because we had some friends over from Australia. So it was lovely having a full house and being able to do that. But my goodness, yeah. The Christmas turkey, doing all that, and then deciding to do all the Jamie Oliver recipes, which give yourself even more work than you really need to do. But it was a good, fun Christmas. We got through it unscathed. The house performed well. I was constantly keeping an eye on the temperature, thinking, with the oven on today, and lots of people in this room, and Twister going on in the background. What is actually going to happen temperature-wise? I think the most we had was 22 Celsius. There were a couple of occasions when we had the windows on tilt and turn. That was really just because we could. And it would be nice to have a little bit of a breeze coming through and no radiators are on, so you don't actually feel that bad doing that. If you'd had all the heating on to get you to that temperature, you might be a little upset for that. So really enjoying the passive house and showing some of our friends who are not familiar with the concept. A lot of them, one of the families came from Australia and they're travelling between the homes here in the UK, as you tend to do if you're someone who comes back to visit relatives. You've then got to cram it into 2 or 3 weeks before you have to head back home. And he said, it's really interesting because you do notice how stuffy and hot a lot of the houses are and the temperature varies. And this is just very stable and you completely forget about it. And I think that that's something that has been mentioned to me before. Until you're standing in this position, it's quite hard to understand that for passive house, the only time you realise it's a passive house is when you step in through the front door and are greeted with that nice even heat. And then when you're inside, it's a bit like being in a steady atmosphere. And I relate this back to my days of doing sound and lighting for plays and things like that. And I remember that if everything went well, no one would comment on it at all. And I think that's the same with comfort, that if everything's fine, no one says anything. It's only if you're uncomfortable or if the lighting and the sound, some incredible glitch happens that everyone points it out. And yeah, so one of those things. But yeah, we've had a really good Christmas and New Year, itching to get back into things. And one of the challenges, I think, or I'm sure I mentioned this going into the new house, is that you're just trying to keep everything as new as possible. And when you've got 4 or 5 kids running around the house, you have to just let go a little bit. But I'm finding it tough. So today's podcast, slightly different because I just felt it was one that I wanted to do and that it was the right time to do it because it's a new year and that's when everyone sets their New Year's resolutions. It's also something you do very early on in your self-build journey, is you have to do that dreaming. You want this house, so you have to start thinking about it in that way, visualizing it, that one day it will be there, and then it does happen and it just seems completely normal and you forget everything that's gone before it. So what I want to do today is the same sort of thing, but for house planning help. Because, let's just rewind a bit. Why did I start up the podcast in the first place? Well, I think the main reason was actually because I came from a media background and I had to reassess everything. I thought, no, that's it. I've had enough in there and I'm now going to do something different. So I set up this podcast and I want to do something around climate change, or to have some positive effect or feel I was doing something like that. That's incredibly vague. So I thought at least I can try and narrow it down, because we know construction is responsible for a lot of the carbon emissions that the whole planet basically has to deal with. So putting myself in construction would be a good place. I also find it very interesting, particularly houses, and that's how I niched down and got into this area. So alongside that, I set myself the challenge of building a house, and I've done that now. It's weird. Took me 6 years. I wanted it to take me 4 years. Guess you never really know how long these things will take. But now, and the website as well, I think we're up for fresh challenge. Well, that's really today's episode, is just thinking about what could be next. So I want to throw around a couple of ideas. I think what I need to do first is the definites. What is definite? For example, number one, you just want to take a breather. I've talked about self-build fatigue before, and that I've gone through with a route where we've hired people, a full service from the architects, from the contractor. So this is the easy route, and you still get tired by the time you get to the end. And I think it's just looking around the house and knowing that we've got a pretty completed house, and we've had comments that, oh, it looks great. But we still look around and we think, well, we haven't done that, and we haven't done this, and we haven't done the other, and don't even talk about the garden. So you get into that scenario, and I think it'd be very foolish to set off on some new quest until I just felt the energy is returned. I'm ready. I'm so pleased it was a positive experience. That was something that was very important to me, and perhaps one of the main reasons why we went for that full package is that we wanted to come out thinking, let's do this again. I'm also excited to spend more time with our hub members. It's the paid section of House Planning Help, and that's just great to see the range of projects. It actually surprised me. I thought a lot of people would just be wanting to build passive houses, but we get all sorts in there. A lot of people, I think, with the common theme of wanting to be ecological and drawing their own conclusions. We had the podcast talking about my own build. You know, I think I could have gone further, but we talked about the reasons why that didn't happen. And so I want to help more in the hub. We've also got other things that we can be doing in there. I've noticed many holes in terms of courses that we could be providing. Certainly, we've got a year's worth, perhaps more, of content with our in-depth video case study. We're now on my own project, so we're little by little each month adding another episode into the hub. So that's quite exciting to see that happen. And then that gives me a bit of time to think where we might go next, because video is my superpower from my time in the media. Also, I can't see myself doing another self-build for the time being. If there's a reason, yes, of course, I would build my own house again. But it would have to be because we wanted to move somewhere else, maybe closer to relatives, or maybe I needed money out of the house, or maybe for retirement needed something smaller. I don't know. It has to be a valid reason for why I would want to self-build again. I don't think I understand that serial self-build mentality, because is it really not just property developing? If you've actually tailored a house to your own personal needs, shouldn't you live in it for a bit? At least for a couple of years. So that's what we're hoping to do. I understand no one can predict the future, so things can change. And the final thing is that I definitely do want to do another project. Now, when I say do another project, obviously I'm not that keen on getting my hands dirty, although it could make for an interesting few podcasts. So yeah, get involved in some respect. Probably it's going to be more filming it, bringing it to you. One of the nice things of doing the podcast is I definitely felt as the project developed that I was able to shine a light on different aspects that if I'd been just making podcasts about house building and not actually doing it myself, then those insights, no way would they have come to me. And that's one reason, or another reason, why I know I've got to get back into another development at some point, because otherwise the learning just stops there. And that's not what I want. I've had such a fantastic learning experience, and I want to bring more of that to you. So we talked about why I set up the podcast in the first place, wanting to make a difference on the bigger picture, the planet. And I think that that's one nice aspect of eco homes, in inverted commas, is actually by building healthy and comfortable homes, you're ticking that box of it is better for the planet anyway. There's a lot more that potentially I might like to do, which is not so much house planning help. I don't know. Every so often I bump into people that I think are particularly interesting, that for the sake of the planet, they have made a big change in their lives. I'll give you an example. Chris Herring from Green Building Store, I had a meal with him a month or so back, and we just got talking about why he became, I can't remember whether it's a vegetarian or a vegan, but it was to do with climate change. Yes, the obvious reasons of, don't want all the animals to be killed, but to actually do that because of ecological motives, I think is very, very inspiring. And I know in my own life, I love meat, but I'm constantly saying to myself, could I be doing with less? Let's just head down that path. So that's one of my personal goals of this year. I've got lots of little things that I've talked about on the podcast before in my life. For example, I don't really have baths anymore. I just have short, sharp showers, and it doesn't make a difference in my life whatsoever. So little habit changing things that hopefully might add up. Okay, it has been one of the sadder parts of building a house that I think really the impact that I've made is way, way more than if I just stayed in my little box back in the middle of town. We've talked about this too, that actually that was far more ecological. But you know what? A new house was always going to be built here. And I personally feel that we've got a very good quality house here that was definitely not guaranteed on this spot. So swings and roundabouts, isn't it? And I've learned a lot in this process, hopefully influence what you think as well. So let's just look at what another development might be. And I'm saying all of this not to put us in any particular direction, but really to stimulate a bit of discussion that when we are ready, perhaps you will bump into me this year or next year. Let's have a chat about some of this stuff. What exactly would you like in another project? Or maybe we'll do another one after this. I think we take it one at a time. That's the sensible way to do it. Because there are certain objectives that I would like to achieve. I don't think we should do all of these. As I say, I'm just putting it out there at that stage. And I'll work through the list that I have. If you've got other ones, please comment in the show notes today. It's going to be houseplanninghelp.com/236. So I'll give you some of the examples that I have written down here. And quite high up is budget. I think playing with a different budget and a more specific budget could be quite interesting to work through. You might have seen that TV program about how to build a house for £100,000. Me looking at that now is just thinking, what? How on earth is that possible? But that kind of idea of first of all thinking, well, what could we do? Okay, let's specify the budget and then let's stick to it. Whatever happens, let's see it all the way through. And I think that this is far, far bigger challenge for a self-builder than it is for someone who's doing a spec development, because as a self-builder, you're just so close to it and you know it's going to be your house and you want it to be the best possible and you want it to be like your dream. So definitely something around budgets I think we could all enjoy. Procurement routes too. I talked about not wanting to get my hands dirty, but there is definitely something to be said about exploring some of those other routes. What if I project managed myself? Or maybe it should actually be my wife and, I can report on that as we go through. Or maybe I should physically get out there with a hammer. It would be a disaster, but it would be very entertaining to have a podcast like that. So a different procurement route. There's the other thing, isn't there, of design and build versus going out to tender. So we've been out to tender. What would a design and build look like? I think you're getting the idea here that I'm just trying to contrast what we have already done. And that would apply also to build systems that I don't really want to do another masonry or another timber frame at this stage, because we've got those case studies in the hub and we've looked at those. So it's just trying to vary it as we go through. Another factor that could be interesting is timescale. So this took me 6 years. With the knowledge that we've built up now and perhaps just immediately working with some professionals, could we bring that down to, say, 2 years? Again, it might not happen in that time, but it could be interesting, couldn't it, to see. Yes, I faffed around a bit, certainly in the early days of my project, the dreaming stage. I was just scared, I think, to start looking for land and for making it realistic. And it was only the clock ticking, giving myself that deadline of saying I wanted to finish before I'm 40, that probably got me out there and looking for land. Maybe you two are perhaps dreaming a bit too much and need to ground yourself in reality. So changing that timescale and showing what is possible. Perhaps it could be a prefab route as well, because of course that would make sense with the timescale, wouldn't it? I think another one that naturally you'd think about at this point would be land. Land is no doubt the hurdle. Maybe you're lucky. Maybe you've got a house where there's a big garden and it's going to make sense for you to do that. That problem is solved overnight if you can get planning permission. For everyone else, you've got to go on that journey. And I went down the obvious route. Again, a lot of these things were. So I bought off the open market a piece of land that had been advertised. What about we try and do it a different way? we maybe look for someone who does this day in, day out, finding a good piece of land, and then we divide it up. We might have some self-build, we might have some spec build. Perhaps we could even use this as another heading here. Could we make some money out of it? I've no problem making money out of it if some decent housing is delivered. Do that every day. If we can make it work, then we can just feed it back in and hopefully get rid of some of these naff volume builders, which is virtually all of them. So aesthetics, I think it would be good for us to try something contemporary. We've had a few projects which are, well, none of them are completely traditional either, but I'd just like something that is properly contemporary and out there, using different architects. I know quite a few architects who are very good, and to learn from their practices is definitely high up on my agenda. So as you can see, with all these variables, it's very difficult to know. I don't want so many that actually we lose the focus. It might just be that we pick one of these and then maybe can work in a couple more. Financing is definitely going to be a challenge if I do tackle another project, because I don't have the money to get going. It's been sunk into the house. I'm sure there are ways to drum up a bit to start things off. However, what other ways are there of financing things? Could we do crowdfunding again? We have done that before on a very, very small scale, but might it work for something like this? Could we create an intentional community if we have got one of these bigger pieces of land? So there are lots of questions here. I think I've mentioned everything on my list. We will definitely do something. I don't know when, and as I say, it's all up in the air. But this year maybe is about writing that next mission statement. Maybe we'll get to it sooner. Maybe it'll take longer. Who knows? But I wanted to get this episode out there so you knew what I was thinking. Finally, I wanted to mention retrofit. If you've been listening to this podcast for a few years, you might remember we used to do quite a few episodes on retrofit, and I felt that I was at a fork in the roads, that I needed to focus, particularly because my own project was going to be a new build, that everything that we did need to be that way. At some point, we will reverse back and we'll start doing more on retrofit. Is that time now? I think this may be something we've already decided that we're not quite there yet, particularly when there are so many things, for example, in that list that we just have been through. I just thought retrofit needed a mention here. If there's anything else, any feedback from today's episode, what I would like you either to say hello to me on one of the social media channels. I'm sure you'll find me wherever you hang out. Twitter is probably still my favourite. I'm at Ben Adam Smith on there. But the other way is just straight into the show notes. Just go straight there. houseplanninghelp.com/236. We've got skeleton show notes because it will just run you through some of these ideas I have, and then we can add to it in the comments, which is right down at the bottom. Just keep scrolling down. Just before I check out of here, remember, if you are someone on this self-build journey, particularly if you're researching and trying just to formulate what you want to do, how you're going to go about it, that's why I run the Hub, which is the additional part of House Planning Help, where we've got lots of digital resources. We've been working at it for a few years now. We're at the moment turning around my own case study. So you might remember in this episode, I've talked about having a media background. Well, one of the exciting parts of that is I can use all my media skills to produce some in-depth videos. So think of an episode of Grand Designs, focus more around the decisions. That's what we're interested in. Everything that happens on your project is down to the quality of your decisions. So we try to put a lot of material into the Hub that will help you make better decisions and keep you focused on the ones that really are important. Yeah, everything is important, but some are more important than others. So if you haven't been introduced to the Hub, the in-depth video case studies, we've got courses as well that try and take you through step by step. Definitely a lot more of those coming in 2019. We have got our forum where you can network with like-minded self-builders. It's also where I spend most of my time in the community and just thinking how we can serve our Hub members better. And the other thing is the progress calls. If you want to chat directly to me, we have these progress calls once a month. And something that I'm thinking of opening up soon is office hours. the progress calls are recorded for the community, and then you can check back in at any point. We often have a presentation, but office hours, I'm wondering, I will just sit here in my office, just waiting. If anyone turns up, then that's fine. I will chat and we'll work through difficulties. It won't be recorded. And then I'll do that maybe Wednesday at 10 a.m. GMT, something like that. So that it's a regular time that people know to check in if you've got some challenge on your project and you want to pick my brains. So yeah, that's something to come in 2019. Find out more about the hub at houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, we're back to interviews. Richard Dujitsky is my guest from RDA Architects, and we're going to do a case study of one of their SIPS builds in central London. I hope you can join me for that one. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.